prayer that's the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And today we'll just do this once in the English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Turn the page. We'll continue on page 75 with the second verse there. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And go forward 2 more prayers before we begin. On page 97 or 98, depending on which version of the prayer book, you'll find the short mandala offering prayer. We'll do that verse in English, followed by the offering mantra that is after the next verse. And then we'll go on to the remaining verse that's a refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching, once in English, twice in Tibetan. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayam. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknamba Jamchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyan Gepe Sonangi Jola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknamba Jamchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsuchi Daki Chunyan Gepe Sonangi Jola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. You can set the prayer books aside, and we'll do a short meditation before we begin the class. So again, just find a good meditation posture, one that's suitable for your body, but where there's uprightness to the body and yet relaxing as much as you can into this posture. And breathing normally, begin to pay attention to the breath. No doubt many of you already have a technique that you use with the breath, and then if that's so, then please just do that for the next few minutes. If you don't have a technique, then as usual, I suggest tuning into the sensation that occurs in the area of the nostrils as you breathe in and out through the nose. Making that your meditation object, the simple advice, the instruction is simply to stay present with that as best as you can through the inhalation, through the exhalation. But in any of our meditations on the breath, we need that factor of introspection, vigilance, and paying attention occasionally to see the quality of our meditation. And if we check in and we see that the mind has wandered away from the breath, gotten caught up in thoughts or whatever, at that point we let go of whatever it was that distracted us and gently return to the breath. So I'll ring the chime to begin the meditation period. And again, just a few minutes in silence on this And then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set your motivation for today's class. So now let's set our motivation together. In this series, we're looking at how we engage in these practices that help us to enact the mind of bodhicitta. Recalling that there are two forms of bodhicitta, what we're working with right now in this meditation, which is the aspiration, the wish to become enlightened for the sake of others. But then we also have the engaging bodhicitta, when that bodhicitta kind of grows legs and begins to do things in the world. When we take the bodhisattva vows and engage in the bodhisattva behavior. So it's important that as we look at the behavior of a bodhisattva, how we transcend our own limitations, keep moving beyond what currently restricts us to enlarge our hearts and our minds, that we do this with bodhicitta motivation. We think about the welfare of all sentient beings. In order to do this, sometimes it's really helpful just to narrow it down to the few beings, perhaps, that we have in our lives that we feel a great love and great compassion for, that we would gladly give up our own happiness and take on the suffering of others without any problem. So think about those beings in your life right now. It might be spouses, children, family members, pets, whoever it is you feel a strong closeness to. Initially think that you're here for them. You already have a strong feeling towards them that's positive. So it should feel quite natural to say that I'm here today in order to work on my own qualities so I can eventually help these very dear beings in my life. That's already a very wonderful thought. It goes beyond the normal patterns of self-centeredness. To look at least those beings who you already feel some closeness to, some kinship with. And then see if you can expand beyond that to include all the other people who are acquaintances in your life, all your other Facebook friends or what have you, people who know you, who you may not feel quite as close to. But nonetheless, they're in that category of friends, acquaintances, people dear to us to some degree. Think that you're here today for all of them. And then try to include the countless strangers. These are beings that we don't have a direct connection with in this life, at least not yet, but they are in our lives indirectly in this world of interdependence that we live in. They perhaps are the people who grow the food that we eat, or ship it, or sell it at the stores that we go to, or package it. So many people involved just in the food that you eat. Look at all the other things we have in our lives that individuals, beings in this world are involved in creating. We can feel a strong connection to those beings and open our heart to them within that understanding. They may not be our friends, but they contribute to our welfare. So we can consider them within this scope of our concern. So try to enlarge your motivation to include all of them. And then lastly, try to bring in all the individuals who perhaps have been quite challenging for you in this life. Those who we consider difficult people, enemies. It might be hard for us to have the same level of concern for them that we do for the other beings we brought to mind. But nonetheless, we need those beings in our lives as well. With them in our lives, we can practice a deeper compassion, a deeper concern, practice patience, tolerance, forbearance. We need those individuals in our lives, and we should be grateful, actually, that we have difficult people that challenge us. Can you open your heart to them as well and think that today you are here for them as well as all sentient beings? And then generate the wish to use the time we have together today to develop your own mind, to move closer and closer to enlightenment by following the Bodhisattva path, so that you can eventually help every one of those beings without exception. You can become a source of great instruction, guidance, support through your love and compassion for all of them. In this way, with this motivation, everything we do today will become a cause for that result. Okay, so those of you who didn't make it in last Sunday, we ended up having the class. There was a lot of debate before the class as to whether we were going to or not. We're going to get better emergency procedure so that we can notify people. So there were about 15 people here who showed up. Those of you who are in the room who were here last week, thanks again for coming. So we went ahead with the class. I'll review a bit of what I talked about last week. Before I get into the material, though, I thought it might be useful. The subject of Lynn Twist and her work around fundraising came up a couple of times, and I realized I didn't have all the accuracies of the story potentially. So I went and found the video that she did for TED Talks. And I'd actually like to start with it because even though it's a story of kind of the other side of it, we are going to talk about receiving as part of giving, because it is included even within our secondary Bodhisattva vows to be a good receiver of things as well. But it is an important kind of discussion because it gets into the whole idea of motivation, because she's speaking to those who are giving to her foundation that she was an executive at, the World Hunger Project, I think it was called, or Hunger Project. Anyway, she was in the process of fundraising, and she'll explain it in her own words what transpired. And I think that she gives much more kind of detail to what happened and gives you more insight by listening to her. So can everyone see the screen okay? Let me get everything kind of up and running. And then my computer hasn't completely shut off.
I don't know if anyone needs this. This is on my desk.
Oh, you can just leave it on the thing there. That's fine. We don't need it, I think, for this. I think I've got the volume turned all the way up, and I'm going to put the microphone over here as well.
Nice title. You're from the money culture.
Yeah, she's anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about her afterwards. She does introduce herself in here too. So.
I learned my lessons about money from an unlikely source. Not business school here at Berkeley or at Stanford where I went, sorry about that, but from people I used to call poor. And I actually did call them poor, most people do. But when you actually work hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder with people that I used to call poor, you realize there's nothing poor about them. And to call them poor is to demean them and ourselves. Because what's poor is their circumstances, not them. In fact, those circumstances provide a kind of environment that makes them strong, resilient, innovative. In fact, they exhibit more courage to live through a day than you and I are going to need in our entire lifetime. It's inappropriate to call these people poor. That's their circumstances, but not them. They're whole and complete and actually totally awesome. I also learned a lot of lessons from people I used to call rich, and we make the same mistake when we label those people by their financial circumstances, although they look glamorous and what everybody seems to want. But when you work side by side, as I have, with people that I used to call rich, there's a suffering there too. There's a misunderstanding about who they are. People relate to them in a weird way, and they relate to themselves in a weird way. They're whole and complete people living in the ebb and flow and sometimes tyranny of excess resources, which can be completely confusing. We live in a culture around money that's sick, that makes us a little sick, where there's suffering everywhere, from the people living in abject poverty to people living in massive wealth and a lot of us in between, because that culture actually is based in a whole lot of lies, promises that never get fulfilled, and a misunderstanding of the world, in my view. I learned some very, very special lessons on one day in my life, many years ago, before most of you here were born, when I was a young fundraiser for the Hunger Project. And at the Hunger Project office, the work of ending world hunger, we got a call from a huge food company. Actually, at that time, it was the largest food company in the United States and I think the world. And they'd had a scandal. They'd been caught red-handed doing something that was actually illegal and shamed the company, and they were embarrassed and humiliated, and they were scrambling because their stock was plummeting and they had this terrible image. And we got a call from that company saying they wanted to give a contribution to ending world hunger. A little suspicious, but I was dispatched to this Midwestern city. I went to what was called a breakfast meeting with the CEO of the largest food company in the world in this gigantic building. I went all the way to the top of this gigantic building in the Midwest, and in this man's office, first of all, he sat behind, I think, the biggest desk I've ever seen in my life. It's huge. And behind him were floor-to-ceiling windows. And this was an early morning meeting. I thought it was a breakfast meeting, but it was just named breakfast because it was early, it was 7:30. And I sat on this side of the table, and he sat with his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sun was rising behind him. And I know everybody's been in this situation. I could not see this guy. He was backlit. I look at this man, very, very important man, but I never saw his eyes. And I'm sitting there on this side of the table. He could see everything about me. And I had 15 minutes to talk about ending world hunger. So I needed to get right on with it. So I did the best I could to inspire him and, say something really moving. And I got into it. I was totally into it. And then I looked at my watch. I had my 15 minutes, and I'd already talked for 8 minutes. I thought, God, he's got to say something here. So I was quiet. And then he didn't, as far as I know, he didn't say anything. He opened the drawer on his side of the desk, pulled out a yellow, already filled out computer check made out to the Hunger Project for $50,000. Now, I was a young fundraiser. This is years and years ago. That would have been the biggest contribution I'd ever raised. But something else was happening there. And when he picked up that check out of the drawer and he pushed it from his side of the desk, this giant desk, over to my side of the desk, as it came over to my side of the desk, I felt the guilt and shame and wrongdoing and out integrity of the company coming with that money, like a dump. I picked up the check. I had the presence of mind to do that. I thanked him, the presence of mind to thank him. Then he stood up, and I don't remember if he even said a word. I don't even know. And this kind of cardboard cutout of a guy reached toward me with his hand and said, thank you, as if I was dismissed. I put the check in my briefcase and I walked out of there, and I felt sick to my stomach. I felt dirty. I felt used. I felt yucky. I went down to the street level. The building was really high, so I started to get nauseous going down. Thought it was the elevator, but actually it was this check. And I took a taxi to the airport. I was due in New York that night. This is early in the morning. Due in New York that night at 6:37 p.m. for a fundraising event at my friend Peter's Harlem church. We were going to convene in the church basement. He wanted me to raise money from his wonderful friends in Harlem and African American church there. So I had plenty of time to get there, but I got caught in a Midwestern storm and landed in Tulsa, and then we took off and landed in St. Louis, etc. We finally get to New York hours and hours and hours and hours later. This is way back before cell phones and internet. I was already late when I landed in LaGuardia. It's raining cats and dogs. The storm is in New York too. I rush to the church in Harlem, not really clear where I was going, just frantic, how you are when you're late. I get there 2 hours late to this meeting in the church basement. I had no way of telling them I was going to be late. I run down the steps of the church basement. Okay, it's raining outside like crazy. There's buckets all around the church basement for leaks. There's a cement floor painted gray, and 75 people in folding chairs sitting there waiting for their speaker, me. My friend Peter is telling jokes, or I don't know, lighting his hair on fire, doing something to keep them there. And finally he sees me. He says, Lynn's here. And I run up the aisle, apologize. I turn around and look at these people, and it was that kind of fluorescent lighting that sometimes is in a basement church. And I turned around and I saw these people, and I could see every face, not just one or two, all 75 people. Beautiful, extraordinarily attentive, somehow awesome African American people. I was the only white person in the room. And I got moved like I am now. And I started to talk about the work you're doing in Africa. And I got really into it. And they hung on every word. I could actually see them. That was very helpful. And then it was time to ask for the money. If you're a fundraiser, if you've ever fundraised, there's that moment, and the moment came. And so I did like a really, really good ask, and you could hear a pin drop. And there was plop, plop, plop in the buckets and the rain outside. And then a woman stood up, an elegant, African-American, slender woman. I'd say she was in her 70s. She had gray hair parted in the middle and a tidy bun at the back of her neck. And she had a maid's uniform, formal old-fashioned maid's uniform, and a raincoat on and a purse on her arm. And she was tall and slender, and she stood up and she said, "My name is Gertrude, and I like you," she said. "Oh, good. And I like what you said. And I want you to know something," she said. "Money is just like water. It flows through every life. It doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to all of us, or none of us. Some people have a rushing river flowing through their life. Some of us, just a little trickle, like me. I don't have a bank account. I don't have a checkbook," she said. "I don't have credit cards, but I have money. And I earned it from doing some people's wash. That's how I earn it. I'm proud of that. And I have money in my purse, and I want to give it to you. And I want you to know that this money that's like water is a carrier. That's why we call it a currency. It's a current. And as it flows through my life, I know it's my job to pass it on where it'll do the most good for the most folks. So I'm going to give my $50 in my purse to you." And she walked up the aisle of that church basement, and by this point I was crying. I think she was crying, I can't really remember. And she gave me her $50 in tens and fives and ones and some change, and she gave me a big hug. And then every single person in that church basement stood behind her, and one by one they gave me their $16.75, $72.03, $10, $6. And I didn't have a basket, so I put it in my briefcase, at the bottom of which was the yellow computer check for $50,000 face down. And by the end of that extraordinary experience, we were singing, we were crying, it was awesome. And I went back to my hotel and I put the $50,000 check on my bed and the $637.33, which was the total of the amount of money that was given to me in cash in the church basement. And I saw this money, this $633.37 is a carrier of love, commitment, courage. This is going to do more for ending hunger than that $50,000. So I sat down, wrote a letter to the CEO, and I sent the money back. Now, that would be the end of the story, but there's a really awesome PS, and that's this. 3 years later in my office in San Francisco, I got a handwritten letter from that CEO. And that letter said, "I'll never forget the return of that $50,000. It really rocked my world." And the letter that you wrote saying, when the company's committed to ending world hunger and this money carries their commitment, we'd love to accept the money. But right now, we choose to send it back. That's what my letter had said. And he said, I left the company after that year, got my retirement package, a lot of money, and I started paying attention to ending world hunger for the first time. I was head of a food company. It didn't occur to me until I retired to pay attention to ending world hunger. I've followed the progress of the Hunger Project, and I've been deeply impressed, deeply moved, and I want to know if you would now accept, with all my heart, my personal check that comes from my commitment, my engagement, my intentionality, my participation in ending world hunger for $250,000. And I did. So what I want to tell you is I have learned, as Gertrude told me so beautifully, that money is like water. When it flows, it purifies, it cleanses, it makes things grow, it makes things green. When it's held and hoarded, just like water, it gets toxic, stagnant. It actually makes you sick. We need to move it. It comes through our lives in a way that allows us to pass it on to the most good for the most folks. And if you recognize that you are enough, that you have enough, that the universe constantly meets you and gives you exactly what you want, rather than living in the mindset, the crazy, unconscious mindset of scarcity, chasing more all the time. If you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is mostly what we're brainwashed to want more of, you can use all that energy that's tied up in the chase and turn to make a difference with what you already have. Not just money, but everything. When you make a difference with what you already have, when you own it, when you nourish it, when you make a difference with it, when you share it, it expands. Let me say that again. This is the principle of sufficiency. If you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, it frees up all that energy tied up in the chase to turn and pay attention to what you have. When you pay attention to what you have, when you nourish it, when you make a difference with it, when you share it, it expands. What you appreciate appreciates. Thank you.
So any comments from anyone?
Fabulous.
Good, good. And it made a huge difference to me to go back and actually hear her say all of this. Like I said, I'd heard it on a cassette tape or something that somebody had gotten when some of our members went to see Lynn Twist at Upaya Zen Center. She comes here frequently to do her sort of weekend on fundraising and money and what have you. Michelle said that you've seen her and participated in the program. So again, it was nice just to go back and really hear her story, the way that she puts it together so eloquently. So anyway, but I think it does get into this whole, yeah, Virginia.
Does anybody else here remember the Hunger Project?
Yes, I used to be a lobbyist.
Excuse me?
I used to be a lobbyist on have the center director for that.
Well, I have very bad
Years ago.
memories of the Hunger Project. That it turned out to be phony. That it was run by a man who was taking the money. And I don't know where this came from, but as soon as she said Hunger Project, I said, no way, no way.
Huh.
You don't remember anything like that? You remember Werner Erhard, an S?
Yes,
Well, weren't they involved in the Hunger Project?
it was someone from one of his classes that started with that,
But
but it was not him.
But you don't remember anything like embezzlement or false representation or anything like that with the Hunger Project?
No. How long ago was that you had that?
Oh, God, when it first got started. When the
Anyway.
Hunger Project first got started.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know,
I don't remember the year.
Well, that would matter as far as my,
Well, let me say,
when it happened.
right.
I'm sorry, I just immediately reacted that.
And I don't know whether that's true or not. I think it would be interesting that she would use her experiences there if it was, because she doesn't sound like a person whose principles would allow her to, you know, be involved in an organization that would do that.
Yeah, I need
but-
to look it up.
Yeah,
Google,
yeah,
little Google.
yeah. It's hard to say.
Virginia, he and his own, the Warner Emirate Association and his training seminars, there's the S and then the involvement of that. There was a lot of discussion, when we say, about the ethics in that.
Yeah, yeah. So setting that issue aside, again, I know it might be an important issue for some of you in the room, but I think it gets this, what she talked about does get into this whole idea of kind of what is going on with our minds when we're giving, as well as when we're receiving. You know, and that fact is, of course, as we've been talking about in this whole course on the 6 perfections, especially so far what we've done on the mind or on generosity, it's the mind that we're mostly talking about. Generating the strong intention to give, but together with that, the motivation that is always pure, the purest that we can make it. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of continuing in that theme of how do we work with our minds while we're giving, so that the gift is the most powerful for the people that we're offering it to, or whoever it is that is involved, as well as for ourselves in terms of our ability to progress on the path to enlightenment more quickly. So anyway, last week what we did, I can go ahead and distribute the sheets that I did last week. Maybe best to start with those. We can send those in a couple of directions. Some of you may already have these from last week. If you didn't bring yours in from last week, you're certainly welcome to take one. I think we have enough for everybody in the room to be able to use one. And some of you left yours here last week, which is great. You know, we have them here and we can distribute them again. But you're certainly welcome to keep this. This is a little thing I put together on the basis of a few different books, kind of giving an explanation of the different types of generosity and then the ways that we practice it for the best results, which is what we're going to get into today. And then the third section is the hindrances to generosity and the remedies to them. So I'll wait till everyone has one.
Everybody ready? Everybody? Oh my goodness.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Ben.
So the very first page there is what we went through last time. Of course, we first talked about miserliness being kind of the mind that is opposed to generosity and how we combat that to some degree. We'll get into that a little bit when we get to the hindrances as well, because that is a part of it. That's on that third page of your handout. But the very first page, we went through last time these 4 ways of giving, which of course, you know, we often talk about it. Even the video I showed you was mostly the first one, giving material things, giving your wealth, possessions, enjoyments. In Buddhism, we think even your body, you know, to the extent that we can give that to someone at some point in our future, that would be the ideal. They say that actually the Bodhisattva who has developed the perfection of generosity has no qualms whatsoever about giving away their body. They say, one writing I was looking at said, it's like giving away vegetables. You know, you wouldn't think anything of it. You wouldn't have any attachment to it, anything holding on to it. You'd happily give your body. Most of us aren't at that level, so we start wherever we are. I didn't point this out last week, but one of the great Kadampa masters said that you can even begin generosity by just giving from one hand to the other. You know, like, oh, here, have this. Oh, thank you. Oh, here, have this. You know, it sounds kind of silly, but it's just like to get you out of this mode of like not having the intention to give. And one of the things that we'll be working with in the next module of Discovering Buddhism is the water bowls. I mentioned this last week. This is a practice that we can do every day. Water is getting to have more value, certainly, than it did earlier on, you know, but nonetheless, it's a relatively inexpensive thing for us to give by putting water bowls on our offering altar. We can symbolize a variety of offerings that we're making, and again, we can do that with bodhicitta. So we can start with things that don't really matter quite as much to us, and then begin to move further and further out to be able to share our wealth to greater degrees and so on. Giving Dharma is said to be the most valuable of these 4, if you will. It doesn't mean that we're all necessarily going to have opportunities every day to do that, but we can share the teachings as best as we can with others when there is an appropriate situation, when the other person is open to hearing that, when we feel we have something worthwhile to offer. This is a wonderful way to be able to help others, right? Because if we're able to point out to people things that they're doing that are problematic for them that they may not have seen before, then they can change their lives and have greater results in terms of their own happiness, their own well-being, which is so much more important than the first one of giving something to somebody that satisfies them in the moment. We can help them to actually know the Dharma, to be able to make their lives better. And with each of these, you can read through the results. These results are something we touched on briefly yesterday, but the third, giving protection, this is something that a lot of us have the opportunity to do here and there when there are people or beings who are in situations where they need some assistance, some help, someone to be there with them, someone to give them a helping hand. Giving protection is a very powerful way for us to help others in the moment. Giving love is a practice we can do all day if we keep our mind in that state of loving kindness, where we just feel that we want to have that mind that embodies love for all beings. Remember, I mentioned the example of Richard Gere, who in one of the Discovering Buddhism videos videos, says that he tried practicing this where every day, every person he met, before he even made any assessments of them, is this a person I want to get to know? Is somebody who's after me for something that, they want from me? His first thought was, may they be happy. May they have happiness in its causes. He said it was totally transformative. It's a practice of living your life from that heart space of loving kindness. Even if it's somebody who is threatening to you, it's worthwhile having loving thoughts towards them. You're going to have a much different response to them in the space of those loving thoughts than you would if you had a mind of anger, hatred, what have you. So these are ways that we can be generous that are detailed out in Buddha's teachings. Any comments on any of those? Or questions? Yeah, Mary.
Gemma, today sometime could you please speak about, address generosity in terms of giving to a center with your body, speech, and mind, and
Sure.
the benefits of that? And
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but it is worth mentioning. When we're going to go into this to some degree when we talk about how we make our Dharma our acts of generosity more powerful. But the idea here is that if we are working with bodhicitta motivation and we're contributing to the Dharma, which of course has the strong intention of helping all sentient beings, then anything that is around the Dharma, be it a Dharma center, be it a guru, be it something that is kind of involved in all of that, becomes very powerful for us because we are contributing to creating the causes of happiness for many other beings. So certainly, giving our time, we talked a little bit about time last week. Time could be considered giving material things because our time is money in the sense it's something we could be doing something productive with and being paid for. And we are choosing to use our time to be involved in the center, to be on the board, to be a volunteer who helps to clean the center, who arranges the flowers, whatever the case might be, however we get involved. That's really an important part of our generosity. And it's very powerful because they call it they use this phrase, it's kind of interesting, they call them the pores, P-O-R-E-S, the skin pores, the hair pores of the Lama. So it's like the Lamas who formed this organization, Lama Thukten Yeshe and Lama Sopa Rinpoche, with His Holiness's blessings, formed this whole organization. So this is kind of like an extension of them. We're in their space, we're in their mandala when we're here, and everything that the FPMT and that our center is doing is geared around fulfilling the wishes of these teachers. Of course, their wishes aren't, so they can have all the, limousines in the world and have all this, great stuff. Their wishes are to have all of us become enlightened, for all of us to practice and use the Dharma in our lives. So when there is that kind of connection to the wishes of our lamas, and of course this is the motivation we're trying to bring, is that everything we do be united with bodhicitta. Well, then all of what they're doing through their bodhicitta, through their wish, their desire to be a benefit to others, becomes very, very powerful. One of the things, I may go ahead and just slide into this now, there are 4 factors that they traditionally teach about karma that make it much more powerful. And the very first one that's taught is the object of those actions. So this is where they say that, it's good to give to beings at large, but your giving becomes even more powerful when you have a higher field of merit, a higher field that you're offering to. Wonderful to offer to sentient beings. Don't get me wrong, this isn't an either or, it's a both and. But to recognize that a good part of our giving should also be around the lamas and their wishes and the centers and everything else that is run that is fulfilling the guru's wishes. That's especially if we have a heart connection with the guru, because that is a way of kind of cementing that relationship so much more and honoring that relationship so that we actually create an even more powerful action by virtue of that. Because our gurus are dedicated to our welfare. So in that way, by being dedicated to helping them through our resources, through whatever we can offer, becomes extremely powerful. They say that the sort of demarcation of the most powerful down to the least powerful, just so you know, not that you can make all your decisions on this basis, well, where do I get more bang for my buck kind of thing. That isn't the point. The point is just to have a cognizance of that so that you recognize that giving at all these levels is important. But it's especially important to give at those levels that become really powerful for us. The highest level you can give to is the guru. And then the 3 jewels after that, anything that you consider Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And of course, any of the projects of the gurus would be included within that. But anyway, that's the top of the tier. After that would be the Sangha. The ordained Sangha are very powerful for us as objects of offering. Most ordained Sangha give up their worldly life. They don't, work 9 to 5 and do all of that. Some do because they feel they have to in the West. But traditionally, this is not the role of Sangha. The role of Sangha is to be dedicated to spiritual life. Well, if you give to them, they're a very powerful extension, again, of the gurus and of what the gurus are trying to achieve in keeping the monastic tradition alive in our organization and so on. So there are ways that you can do that. If we don't have ordained folks here other than when Geshe Sherab is here generally, and when we have visiting teachers who are ordained. But you can give to the IMI, the International Mahayana Institute, which is, it funds the ordained Sangha when they have needs and so on that go beyond what they can manage. So I'm not trying to make this into a pitch. I'm not doing what Len Twist was doing to the executive or any of those folks. I'm just letting you know about these because it is important. And we're in this time frame where it's very meritorious to do these actions. So even dedicating your practice to the Sangha and to the proliferation of the Dharma in that way is really important. So don't think it always has to be something physical, writing a check or doing whatever. Just having those thoughts about the Sangha is really important. After the Sangha, the next that are kind of in the realm of ordinary beings, those who are lay beings, your parents are at the top of the list. Why are your parents at the top of the list? Because your parents gave you this precious body that you have. It was through their kindness. You might say, well, that wasn't any great kindness. You know, they had sex. Well, it's through their kindness that they produced that body and then nurtured that. Your mother cared for you through gestation so that you could, you know, come out of the womb and have your human life, and then cared for you, no doubt, after that. And your father was involved in providing the resources, perhaps. I mean, I grew up in a traditional household where that was what happened. But obviously, nowadays, it's very, you know, diverse in terms of who all contributes. Sometimes the parents aren't as involved, and grandparents are more involved. But you had beings involved who, you know, attended to you. And your parents, especially, they gave you this body. So they become very powerful objects for you. After parents, I think after that it becomes, you know, not so much graded. Obviously, you know, human beings, other human beings are all at some level kind of worthy objects of our generosity and our other kind actions. They do say that it's not as powerful to give to animals as it is to humans, but that's just on the basis of the fact that humans do have a life where they can do something more meritorious with that life. But if you're giving to human beings who aren't doing anything meritorious with that life, perhaps it is better to give your resources to animals and so on. It's not to in any way diminish the importance of tending to animals in this world. It's just acknowledging that as a basis, they have less of an ability to use that money and resources in a more productive way. If you feed your pets or you give money to the zoo or whatever, I mean, they just feed them, they keep them alive and what have you. That's good. Not denying that. But you can't do anything more with that money. Whereas human beings do have the potential to do something more with them. Anyway, that's the gradation in terms of the object. And the object is important to pay attention to see what is it that we have as kind of the basis of our giving, so that we kind of acknowledge that. Let me see if I can find the other sheet. I just want to make sure I touch on all the points as I go through this. The second thing is the subject. They say that, you know, you create more powerful karma when you actually are holding vows. So I will be talking a little later. I don't know if I'll get to it today, but in terms of the Bodhisattva vows, you do have some of the secondary vows that are about giving. And so if you are giving within the context of those vows, your giving becomes more powerful because you're a holder of those vows. As long as you have those vows, your actions become much more powerful. The third factor after the object or the recipient of our actions, let me see, it's ordinary people, one's parents, practitioners of virtue, lay or ordained bodhisattvas, Buddhas, and one's guru, respectively. That's kind of the gradation for the first one, the object. So practitioners of virtue means those who are holding the vows, and then bodhisattvas after that, Buddhas after that, and then one's guru is at the top of the list. The third factor after the object and the subject, the subjective quality, is the substance, the thing being given. I already talked about this in regard to generosity, right? It's more powerful to give dharma than it is to give money. More powerful to give people the advice that will help them to lead a better life than it is to actually give them resources that will help them in the moment. Once more, it doesn't mean that, you know, you could say to somebody, well, I've got $5 I could give you, but I'd rather give you a dharma teaching because, you know, whatever, making some sort of judgment on it. No, I mean, you can give them the $5 and say, you know, and I've got some advice for you if you'd like to hear it. Are you open to that? And see what they say. As I said last week, it's always good to have that opening so that you do know that the person's receptive to what you're saying, because you could turn them off to Dharma if you're saying it in a way that they're not ready to receive. So anyway, this is the idea that generally the actions that we do that cause greater happiness or suffering, if we're making a negative action, create stronger karma. Whereas we also have the factor of continuity in regard to the giving or whatever. If we're giving on a much more regular basis and always trying to reinforce that behavior, it becomes much more powerful then too. It's kind of like, this idea of the stream of that, the water, that if we keep it flowing, it becomes more powerful in terms of its karmic results. The last one is the big one, which we're going to get into in terms of everything else we discuss in this next section, which is our intention, your motivation for giving. But people give for all sorts of reasons. We saw in the video, right, that there was the executive who was giving out of the sort of the guilt, the shame, the wanting to repair its image in the world from having done something really scandalous. I mean, you can have that type of motivation for giving, right? To try to butter the person up, to get something from them, to do something with an ulterior motive is not so beneficial. But if we're doing something with a very pure motivation, it becomes extremely powerful. And the most powerful motivation that we can bring to our practices is bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, which is, of course, something we have to become familiar with. Train in this mind. As I mentioned last week, there'll be a whole course coming up when Geshe Sherab returns at some point there. In that time frame, there'll be the module 10 of Discovering Buddhism, which is about developing bodhicitta. I don't know if Geshe will teach it or a visiting teacher will teach it. Someone will teach that at some point, and it's a wonderful way to get full exposure to all the techniques that help you to develop that mind. But if you live your life and all of your actions of generosity, you go out to feed the birds in the morning, as I do, and try to cultivate bodhicitta motivation for every one of those bird seeds and every one of the birds that eats from that become the cause for all beings to have happiness. It becomes a much more powerful action. You're not about just feeding the birds that land in your yard and partake of that food. You are feeding all beings as best as you can in terms of the strong desire that they all benefit from those actions. So whether you're feeding your pet, whether you're feeding the birds, whether you're feeding someone on the street, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever acts of generosity that you do, become much more powerful when your intention is pure, when you have that bodhicitta motivation. So while we're on the subject of this, before we even get into the handout to continue on that, I did want to touch on something that isn't in the handout, but that Geshe Sopa in his text, his commentary on the Lamrim Chenmo mentions, because he gets into this whole idea of the motivation for giving. And of course, the very first factor, he says there are three sort of factors involved in the motivation, three aspects: the purpose of giving, the thing that is given, and the field or the recipient. And these are thoughts about this. It's not what I just went through in terms of making sure that we're giving to the best field of that. It's having a thought in regard to that. So the very first one, the purpose of every bodhisattva practice, he says, is to attain perfect enlightenment in order to help others. When doing any kind of virtuous practice, we should have this goal in the back of our mind. In this case, one should think, I want to become an enlightened Buddha. Because only an enlightened Buddha can truly help others. In order to do that, I have to accomplish the accumulation of merit and wisdom. The practice of generosity is a way to do that. So if we have that kind of intention, again, this one is a little bit self-oriented because bodhicitta has two aspects, right? It has the self-purpose, which is you becoming enlightened, because you need to be fully qualified. Remember, I used the example of a young girl, perhaps, that has had a lot of people die from cancer in her family. And as a young girl, she makes a determination to become an oncologist or to become a cancer researcher or something. Well, she's not qualified at like 6, 7 years old to be that, right? To help with cancer to that degree. If she wants to really help out to combat cancer, she has to go through all the training to get there. She has to become fully qualified. Her intention is really good. She wants to do that from a very young age, but her qualifications are lacking. It's the same for us. We can have the intention, the aspiration to do this, but we need to be qualified. We need to develop our qualities over time through practicing the 6 perfections, as we're talking about in this course, but to eventually become a Buddha. Because as a Buddha, then we are fully qualified. It doesn't stop us from helping people along the way, but we recognize our limitations. That's what keeps us moving forward, is that we see we're not there yet. Not there yet. I can't help people to the extent I would like to yet. So this is the driving force from our side. Of course, we always want to have the compassion, the desire to benefit others. That's what's driving the whole show, right? We wouldn't want to become a Buddha unless we had the desire to become, to be a benefit to others. That is what's driving our desire to attain enlightenment, is to help others. So he's emphasizing again this intention that we have to get to that state of enlightenment. Therefore, we have to practice generosity. And not feel it like as a burden, to feel like it as, well, this is what's going to get me there. This is what's actually going to take me there to this joyous result. Just like that young girl would be very delighted to go through all of the things she has to study, all the science and chemistry and biology and physiology courses she has to go through in order to get to a place where she's fully qualified to help people with cancer. We do this with great joy. The second factor I mentioned earlier is the things given. He says the object given is of less significance than why one is giving, but our attitude toward that object is important. This is kind of, again, we're not emphasizing the actual thing that we're giving. What is your attitude toward the object? He says the second aspect of a motivation is the way we look at the things we give. From the time of taking the Bodhisattva vows, a Bodhisattva considers that all his or her belongings have already been given to others. Again, I said towards that object. I'm sorry, I meant that's not the person we're giving, it's the object that we are giving. Again, what it is that we are giving. So if we are kind of engaging in the Bodhisattva vow fully, then we think that we've already given everything to others. Remember the verses that we went through in the previous course? We had that little practice booklet, and it said, for the sake of accomplishing the two purposes of all sentient beings without any sense of loss or concern, I give away my body and likewise my enjoyment, such as food and clothing, and even all my virtues, accumulated over the 3 times. Like that's our way we want to live our lives, is that we've given it to everybody. Everyone owns everything that we have in a sense. We're using the resources of others, not with a non-virtuous mind, but with the intention of benefiting them. But in essence, they owned it all already. So he says, continuing, in other words, Bodhisattvas feel that the things they use are actually on loan from others. It is as if sentient beings have said, please hold on to these things, use them well. If I need them at some time, you can give them back to me then. So when we give, we do not think, I am giving them something of mine, or I am giving this because they need my things. We think that this is like what they are entitled to in a sense, because it's already theirs. We've already had the mental thought of giving it. Now, again, we're not all going to be able to practice at that level. We're not going to have that willingness to give whatever it is that people ask from us. But we train in that. That's why we're engaging in this course, is to kind of get our minds moving in that direction. To have that willingness to give. And when we hear others saying, I have a need, could you give me something? We're delighted to hear it. It's like, oh yeah, I have that for you. I've been holding on to it for you all these years, and here it is, back to you. It's kind of an interesting thought, an interesting way of putting it. The third aspect of a motivation is now the field, the object of our generosity from that perspective. Because when we talk about object of generosity, we can say the object that is given. We can also talk about the object that we are giving to, the field, the recipient of that. So here Geshe Sopa says, in order to practice generosity, we need someone to receive our gifts. We should think, I can practice generosity only by giving to these sentient beings. So these people are helping me to create the virtues that are the cause to attain enlightenment. They are truly my spiritual friends. Usually the term spiritual friend refers to a religious teacher or a Buddha, he says. Here we apply it to sentient beings because they too are a special support through which we attain enlightenment. So we want to think about every being we meet as like our dearest spiritual friend. This is somebody who's helping us on our spiritual path. We can have these same attitudes when we get to the practice of morality, when we get to the practice of patience. But here in the context of generosity, when someone has a need and we have the ability to fulfill it, we should say, wow, this is an important person in my life. This is somebody I can cherish because they're helping me on my spiritual path. They're the means through which I'm going to be able to attain enlightenment. So if we hold the motivation that we're there practicing it for the attainment of enlightenment, we hold the motivation that the object that we're given actually belongs to the other beings and we're simply returning it to them, having held on to it for safekeeping for them. And then the third thing is that we have the idea that this is our greatest spiritual friend that we're giving to. Well, that makes the bodhicitta even stronger. That kind of gives this other power to it, because it's no longer about the habitual mind of self-cherishing. It's about cherishing others, seeing them in a more positive light, really valuing them. Venerable Robina, when she was here teaching on generosity quite a few years ago, she said, if a homeless person is walking on the street and happens to come up to you and says they have some need, can you give me $1 or $2 or something? That's your homeless person. Don't think that's someone else's. This is the same sort of mentality, I think, here, that you kind of look at that person as a very dear person, like, oh, thank you for coming into my life. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to practice generosity, to extend myself to you. You can see that kind of orientation, how that would totally transform the situation for the other person, I would think, too, potentially, because they see that you're actually quite happy to be giving. Oh my gosh, I've run into my dearest spiritual friend. Here, let me give this to you. But again, not that second one is kind of important too. We do have that tendency to think that I'm giving what I own. This is my money that I'm going to give to you. But if we have it kind of correct that thought a bit, think that this is actually something we've already given to others. We're just simply asking for it now. What do people think of that? I'm curious. What those thoughts do for you in terms of your own way of giving or your own reflections on that. Yeah, Mary.
I almost think, and I was going to ask this as well, I almost think that kind of jives with, this is already yours, I've just been holding it. Yeah, I agree. Like the buzzwords for nowadays, either we think in a scarcity complex or an abundance, a mind of abundance. I don't quite have that. And I almost think that it's following through with, having an abundance mindset, perhaps.
Right. I think that's a part of it. And also just the idea of, again, that things are flowing through us. Right. That the resources that come in through whatever means we have, through a job, through a social security check, through whatever it is that we're, with the resources coming in, that it's our job to kind of say, how do I funnel this back into other beings, into the world at large? Knowing that if you are doing it with bodhicitta motivation, nothing is wasted. You're not losing a thing. And that's the whole karma of generosity that we talked about a few weeks ago, right? There's nothing lost in this process. Your giving is an extremely meritorious action. So any of that miserly holding on to it, wanting it for yourself, is a totally incorrect thought, because that's actually how we defeat the mind that gets things for ourselves, is through that mind that holds on to it so tightly. How we encourage the mind, or the results that we have, is by giving, by always having that flowing of money through us. Yeah, Alex.
I think this echoes to the teachings of Ram Dass, who many of you may know, died recently, but way back when he said, "Be here now."
Right.
And so, how many of us do even notice we just drove by a homeless person in the street asking?
Yeah.
We're not even present.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Alex, for those online, was bringing up the teachings of Ram Dass and his way of kind of approaching this idea of being present, being with others. And it's an incredible place of generosity too, of just the, paying attention, being able to be responsive to the needs of those around us. Most of us do have our default pilot is our self-cherishing mind, the self-centered mind that just kind of says, oh, I need what I need for the day. And we go about our day doing all of that. And it's those rare times when things break through. But if we lived our life with the thought of, what do others need today? How can I benefit others? How can I serve others? The very beginning of, I don't know, the FPMT handbook has been split into all this stuff online now. I don't know where to even find like the beginning pages of it. But in the very beginning pages of the FPMT handbook, for those who get involved in the organization on the board or as a staff person or whatever, it's a really valuable thing to kind of look at. And the very first thing that said is that the FPMT exists to serve others. That's our main mission. Our main objective is to serve others, whatever that means, in terms of the acts that we do. The whole organization exists to be of service to sentient beings, like all of you in the room. And all of you, as part of the organization, exist to be of service to others in whatever capacity that you can. It really is a very noble way to kind of approach one's life, to say that this is my life, is to serve other beings. How do I make that a reality? So you do have to pay attention. You have to be here now. You do have to have that presence of mind to know what it is that you need to be responsive to at that time to help others. And then do it with the right motivation. Do it with a big open heart. Anyway, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Virginia.
The dedication.
Yeah, that dedication prayer that we do at the end, the Shanti Deva's verses.
Well, the line I remember that just struck me the first time I read this
Uh-huh.
is make people think of benefiting each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, oh, God, there it is. And we're going to need this. And what you have been saying, and
Uh-huh.
that line in particular, more and more,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think I may be mistaken, I may be a total cynic or whatever, pessimist. But I think our lives are changing forever.
Uh,
And we aren't ready to face our lives changing forever. I think climate change is going to do that.
Mhm.
I think this virus is going to do that. People already are thinking, it seems to me, not of benefiting each other, but of, can I get the last bottle of hand sanitizer? I mean, I say that because we tried to get, we have never used hand sanitizer in our lives. And I thought, well, let's just get one of those little bottles, what the hell, might be a good idea. And Gates couldn't find it.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying,
we
Virginia.
really need this kind to be reminded of.
Yeah, no, it's very important to remember that. So Virginia, for those online, I'm just pointing out that prayer that we do at the end of the dedication verses from Shantideva, the very last line, before we do the encapsulation of this Bodhisattva attitude in that final verses, and may people think of benefiting each other. And we've got a lot of challenging things in our world that could show the opposite, that people will only think of benefiting themselves and to hell with everyone else. But we also have the potential in times of crises for the opposite to be seen.
Well, it's also fear.
Yeah.
It seems to be the
Sure.
older I get, the more I see in myself and in general that fear underlies so much of what happens.
Sure. Fear is a big motivator, but fear, when we talk about it in this context as being a really unwholesome mind, is revolving around that strong sense of protecting ourselves, more than others. We can have it for others, but it's usually for others we care about. We don't, we already have some kind of heart connection with them, but yeah, these are challenging times, but I don't know. It was a really corny movie. Does anyone remember the movie Starman with Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen? It's really kind of a corny movie because it was like this being from another planet who takes on the DNA of her dead husband and becomes like, I don't know, it's really strange. But at the end, when he was getting ready to kind of move on to his spaceship and go back to where he was from, he said, what I like about humans is you are at your best when things are at their worst. And I thought that was really kind of touching. I'd saved that little line from that corny movie. But I think it's true. At some level, that is usually what happens, is that when we are confronted with crises, people come from out of the woodworks to help others, to be of some benefit. It gets scarier at times, sure, when you know that helping that person, even look at our healthcare workers in this country who are facing that consequence of just going into work, getting their paycheck every week. I'm sure many of them are very dedicated in what they're doing, but I don't doubt that it causes them some pause, because of what's going on. So I think it's going to be true for all of us. We're going to have some measure of that sort of self-concern and how do we deal with a world that is changing in a lot of different ways. But I wouldn't be surprised if we also see the opposite force of being at our best in the midst of things being really difficult. That's what this whole, I may do my little reprise of my Earth Day talk at some point, I don't know. But that's what Joanna Macy says with the book she wrote with Chris Johnston in terms of active hope, is that this is actually climate change, for example, which is what she's addressing in the book, could be the biggest opportunity for people to come together and have a whole shift in consciousness in this world. Or it could be an utter disaster. I mean, depends on what we buy into, depends on how we see it, depends on our actions on the basis of that, So this is really an important thing that we always look at, and I appreciate you bringing that up. This is what we need to remind ourselves of every day, is how can I be a benefit to others? How can I live my life with that thought? Even if everyone else around me is only thinking of themselves, how can I live my life thinking of benefiting them? So. Wow, it's 11:13 already. Sorry, I kept people a little bit longer sitting, but let's go ahead and take a little break. When we come back, I promise we will get into the sheet and continuing on, but this is all a continuation of the same idea, how we work with our minds. All right, let's go ahead and go back to this little handout that I gave you and just talk a bit more about these ways of practicing generosity for the best and the purest results. why I'm bringing these all in is I know it's hard to bring all of this into a single act of generosity. Somebody asks you for some money on the street, you just kind of reach into your wallet or purse and give them something. But if you can have these types of attitudes and thoughts, then it really does help to make your generosity more powerful. So I said, and it's not about getting more bang for our buck for ourselves. It's about making sure that we're using that opportunity to advance our mission, our goal, which is to become enlightened for the sake of all beings. So the 4 excellent factors that are spelled out on that first page at the bottom are, first, in regard to the giving itself, that any practice of giving should come from the heart with no thought of holding back. Kind of try to get rid of that sort of resistance that's not willing to give it away, to really have it being a total gift from the heart. This is how we ideally should be giving all the time. If we are extending beyond what we can give comfortably, then perhaps that thought will arise where we're not quite committed to it completely and we feel like, not really quite sure I want to give all of this. Well, then you probably shouldn't give at that level if you're not ready to do that, because it's best that the acts that you do engage in feel like you aren't holding back, feel that you're complete in doing that act. The second one is protecting. After engaging in any type of generosity, you should protect the merit from being destroyed or hindered by delusions such as anger. We're working with this whole concept in Buddhism around merit, positive potential. It's a bit of a mystery for all of us, right? Because we just don't know what that's all about. It's an energetic kind of thing that we're engaging in all the time. We're kind of, if you want to think of it as a bank account of all of your merit, well, you're putting deposits in all the time. Every time you engage in a positive action, you're taking withdrawals every time you have some benefits from those, some results from those. So it's a constant flowing thing in and of itself. It's sort of like what was being talked about in regard to money and so on. But we never know where we stand in regard to that. I mean, are you in the red or are you in the black? You never know based on what's going on. You don't get a statement at the end of every month saying, this is how you are doing meritoriously. You've taken many more deposits or many more withdrawals than the deposits that you've made. You're overdrawn. You're going to be. We don't have that ability. So we just have to always just keep attending to it, which means doing the best that we can to protect what we do have that we put in, and what we put in to be as strong as possible. Protecting it means keeping your merit from degenerating by virtue of negative states of mind. I say the worst state of mind for deteriorating our merit is the mind of anger. So we'll be getting to patience. Hopefully we'll have time to look at patience before I take off and travel. In each of these perfections you can obviously spend a lot of time with. But the perfection of patience is the third of the 6 perfections, and it's where we learn to have that undisturbed mind when we're dealing with difficult situations and difficult people. But if you have a mind that engages in a lot of anger and has those thoughts pretty heavy, you can diminish the power of what you created positively. It sounds strange, but it's just kind of weakens the force of that and may destroy even the forces of that. You're dedicating it, which is kind of what we're going to talk about in the 4th point, does protect it to some degree, but it doesn't protect it from the mind of anger. If you do get a mind of anger, you can still have some weakening of that positive potential. So protecting means doing the best that you can to not let the mind go to that place of anger. There's a wonderful example. It's not that wonderful. It's an interesting one from the literature around Shariputra. Many of you have heard of Shariputra, the disciple of the Buddha. Shariputra and Madhkalyana are the 2 that are often seen on the sides of the Buddha, 2 little monks, that are standing there. Shariputra apparently was ended up in the Hinayana path, the individual vehicle. That was where his motivation ended up falling. But for a while, he was entertaining the Bodhisattva motivation. It said he even kind of took on bodhicitta as a practice and was trying to live his life that way. And the story is that he was out one day and this sort of Mara appeared as some kind of demon that challenged him. He said, I want one of your hands and one of your arms, something like that. So this beast kind of asking for a part of his body, he decided, well, I'm trying to practice the Bodhisattva path, so I will give my arm to this being. So it said that he cut off his hand with his, cut off his right hand, and he went to extend it with his left. And in India, this is bad culture. You don't do this because you use your left to wipe your bottom after you've done your business. So it's like handing something to somebody impurely. And the demon was like, no, I wanted your other hand. Like, how dare you hand that to me with your left hand? And it said that he got kind of upset at this and said, with beings like you in the world, I can't possibly, save you all. So he lost his bodhicitta vow, and he kind of was still able to maintain his hinayana practice. But it said that it kind of caused a huge sort of diminishment in his positive potential by virtue of that. So it's just a little story that exemplifies one, too, making sure we're not practicing beyond what we're capable of doing and not having the expectation. Remember, giving without expectation is a really important thing. You don't even give to receive a thank you from that person. If you give some money to somebody and they kind of look at it and then probably put it in their pocket and walk away, well, you gave. Be rejoicing in your giving. You don't need them to say thank you and be, expressing that to you every moment. So this is the idea that we need to protect this, because otherwise we can have a degeneration of our positive potential. We can see, huge ramifications from that. Purifying. Your actions of giving should be made perfect by purifying your mind of wrong motivation and delusions. This is where we do get into some of those ulterior thoughts, giving for the sake of getting something from another. This is really just business. It's not generosity. That's how the business world works, the quid pro quo or whatever. I give you something and you give something to me back. That's not a proper way of giving. It's not a right attitude for giving. We want our motivation to be as pure as possible, to always be about how can we help the other person, be a benefit to the other person through whatever we're giving, whether we're giving dharma, protection, material goods, what have you. Let's see, the fourth one, increase the virtue of your giving by dedicating all the merit from your actions of generosity to be a cause for all beings to attain enlightenment. This is what people often forget, right? And I forget it sometimes when I do my feeding of the birds in the morning. I'll go out there with all my bodhicitta motivation. I'm ready to give to these birds with great bodhicitta. But do you stop after that act of giving and dedicate and say, oh, may all the merit from this giving this to these beings go to the attainment of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. It's wonderful to have the first part of it, but if you don't have the other part of it, well, then you're not sort of putting it in the bank. You're just letting it just be out there where it could blow away, or something else happened to it. It could ripen into other results for you. You want it to ripen into the best possible result for all beings. So any questions on those four kind of excellent qualities, those four excellent factors? And these are thoughts we can bring to our act of generosity. The acts may not change. This is where one of the things I mentioned earlier when we did the very first exercise was that we could look at this idea of what am I doing currently, what are ways I could be more generous, and what is keeping me from doing that. But you can even be more generous continuing to do what you do, but doing it with more powerful mind states. Because remember, we're talking about perfecting the mind. We're not talking about perfecting our acts of generosity necessarily. Our acts should follow from what the mind does. We should be more willing to give our time to the center, or give money to Rinpoche's projects, or give money to help sentient beings in a variety of ways. Whatever it is that we're moved by, it's important that we do keep pushing that. But it's important that the acts that we do engage in become as powerful as possible. So that's what this whole section is really looking at, is factors that you can bring in that do make your actions even more powerful. Let's go on then to, I don't want to spend tons of time on these because I think some of them are pretty straightforward. You may be able to also practice with what's on page 2 at the top, the 3 supreme qualities: supreme reliance, supreme method, and supreme dedication. Rely on bodhicitta purely as your motivation for generosity without any taint of delusion. This is your reliance. We already heard it a little bit in terms of some of the other things we talked about. It's just being reiterated as a factor that you want to try to maintain as best as you can in your generosity, is have bodhicitta as your motivation. It's hard, again, to have the mindfulness of that, but if you can, try to practice that. Get more and more familiar with bodhicitta through all of your actions. Remember, we did the little bodhicitta mindfulness thing. We talked about that in the last course, and Rinpoche has instructions on that in the book Bodhisattva Attitude, where even when you are, eating your food, you can transform it and think that you're giving it to all beings. But you have to practice that way. It doesn't come naturally. We don't just instantly think of all beings and our actions benefiting them. We do have to engage in some level of practice. The second one, supreme method, this gets into the emptiness teachings. When practicing generosity, be aware of the emptiness of the 3 spheres. The giver, the act of giving, and the receiver are all empty of inherent existence. You could also say even the object that you're giving, but sometimes it's used in terms of, the object, the recipient. You could also certainly think of the object that you're giving, but then the subject and the action. These are what are called the three spheres of any action. Anything that you're involved in, by me sitting here going blah, blah, blah about the Dharma, I should be thinking in my mind that I'm empty of inherent existence. The act of teaching Dharma is empty of inherent existence. You all as recipients of the Dharma are empty of inherent existence. What does that do? It acclimates our mind to that continual thought of the wisdom aspect. Remember, we have these two branches that we're working with. When I first laid out the 6 perfections, I talked about them, that the first 4 essentially fit into the method side of it. The compassionate method that keeps us with gas in the tank, in a sense. It keeps us kind of connected with others and having the motivation to keep moving. The wisdom energy, which is primarily the last 2 perfections, concentration and wisdom, helps us to achieve that highest level of wisdom. The wisdom that knows the nature of reality directly, non-conceptually, that knows emptiness. So this is the idea behind this, is you want to familiarize yourself with this method of bringing wisdom into your actions. Otherwise, we do get into a kind of reinforcing all of our belief in everything existing intrinsically, substantially, inherently. And we'll talk about this wisdom of emptiness when we get to the perfection of wisdom, the 6th perfection. But the idea here is that as much as you can, through your own understanding of it, try not to have all that self-grasping and clinging present, even grasping at the action itself, even grasping at the other person as inherently existing. You just see it again as all a dependent arising. Merely imputed, I am giving merely imputedly to this being who is merely imputed. It introduces some additional thoughts that you can help to accentuate and move along the path of wisdom, that branch, that wing of our practice. The third one, supreme dedication, is an essential part of all of our practices. As I said earlier, dedicating the virtues arising from giving to the attainment of enlightenment. As I said, if you don't dedicate, well, then you're not sort of saying, I'm allocating these merits for that cause. It doesn't mean that they don't give any other benefits beyond that, but it means that they will definitely be a part of giving rise to your enlightenment. When you dedicate, you assure that those are inexhaustible. They often use the analogy of it's like putting drops of water into a bucket of water. It's like, because the bucket of water, it all kind of stay within there. If you leave a few drops of water on the counter, they evaporate really easily, right? I'm not saying there's no evaporation in the bucket, don't get me wrong. We're living here in this dry climate, and we know that buckets of water evaporate. But you're kind of storing them in this way, saying this is what I'm dedicating these merits for. And in that way, they become greater and greater, and they continue to move towards that objective. If you don't dedicate, then you're, again, not having that much force behind your actions. They may ripen into other results, but won't ripen into the results of your enlightenment. Those are the 3, and again, the teachings that are generally set out in the Lam-Rim text that go into this detail say that this is the best way. If we can at least practice with those 3. The 4 that we talked about, the excellent factors, are good. If we can have these 3 supreme qualities, excellent. Doing a really good job, having bodhicitta as your main motivation, trying to think of the emptiness of giver, giving, and recipient, and then having that dedication at the end. The 6 supreme qualities enlarge on this. You'll see some of them are as above. Reliance is the same. The object, make the gift itself of the best possible quality. This is what I said earlier. It's really best to give the best quality to others. When we're kind of giving something like at a food drive here, well, think about, if we were doing like a bigger food drive, for example. I mean, here it's nut butter, and some of you may not even like nut butter, but if you're doing a big food drive and you kind of take all the stuff that you don't like and you put it in the basket, well, then what makes you think that everybody wants that? You should be giving gladly what you would like to receive, right? I mean, that would be the best quality, because we do treat ourselves the best often. So, or even give beyond what you think would be for you. It's something that would really kind of push you and say, oh, wow, I never get that for myself, but I should give that to someone else. And like Manuka honey or something. It's like so incredibly expensive. Never buy it for myself, but it'd be a wonderful gift to give to someone else, right? That's the kind of mentality we should have, is trying to make the object of the best quality. The supreme purpose of the 6, this is described as the supreme purpose for giving is to bring temporary and ultimate happiness to all other living beings, to kind of have that goal of all beings. As I said earlier, when you're giving just to the birds in your yard or to your pet or whatever who's hungry, that's limited if you only think in that regard. But if you have the thought, by virtue of me giving food to this animal, May this become the cause for all beings to have what they need right now, to have the food, the sustenance that will help them, as well as all their ultimate benefits. Every being, without exception, even Donald Trump. So, whoever it is that we feel is kind of the person we might exclude from that, those sorts of thoughts, you want to include them. Make sure we have that thought for all beings. Supreme method and dedication, 4 and 5, are the same as above. Supreme purity, give with an attitude wishing to be free from the obstructions to liberation and the obstructions to omniscience or Buddhahood. So this is, again, how we make it very pure, is that is our goal, is to be free of what keeps us not just bound in our own cycle of suffering, which is what the first of those are, the obstructions to liberation, but also what keeps us from being omniscient, keeps us from being a Buddha. So if we have that underwriting thought there as well, we make it very pure, because it's not about any mundane results. It's about supramundane results. It's about the results of transcending beyond samsara to the state of nirvana, and transcending even beyond nirvana to the state of Buddhahood, to non-abiding nirvana, where you can actually be of benefit to others. So just so you know what those are, we've talked about them on other occasions, but the obstructions to liberation are the ignorance that we've been referring to in terms of the emptiness teachings, that helps us to, that wisdom helps us to undermine that ignorance. All the delusions that are built on the ignorance, which is our attachment, our anger, aversion, our jealousy, our pride, our doubt, all these kinds of things, are all built on that. And all the seeds of all of that. That is what's keeping you bound up in cyclic existence and not able to attain liberation. You want that to be removed, but the Bodhisattva, that's not their main obstruction that they're trying to overcome. The main obstructions are the obstructions to omniscience. Well, what are those? Those are these subtle imprints from having had ignorance in your mind since beginningless time. These imprints give rise to a dualistic appearance. They give rise to a false appearance that things seem to exist on their own, outside of ourselves, apart from ourselves, independent of ourselves. That false appearance of independence and the imprints that give rise to that are the obstructions to omniscience. They are what keep you from being a Buddha, because a Buddha's mind no longer has anything binding it. It is free and able to know all things at all times, to have that level of knowledge. So these are sometimes called the obstructions to knowledge, even to omniscience, Buddhahood. How they traditionally set it out as an example is that if you have a clay pot and you're storing garlic cloves in it, well, then you might want to eventually use the pot for something else, purify it completely. Well, you can take the garlic cloves out. That's like the first level. And then you smell the pot. Even in San Francisco, when I lived there, we had a clay pot we stored garlic in, and it's nasty. It's not good. I can't use this for anything else, right? It's got the imprint of garlic in it. The garlic's gone, but the residue is there. So that's what the second level of these obscurations are like. They're like a subtle imprint that's come through the force of having had that ignorance stored in your mind since beginningless time. So that's the attitude that we want in terms of having it completely pure, is to think, this isn't about any kind of objective of getting any temporal results. This is about getting those final results, the results of completely removing all of my obscurations to my own liberation, but moreover, my obscurations to omniscience. So in the state of Buddhahood, I can help others. So all these, they revolve around the same concept of bodhicitta here and there, but it is a very different thought. It's a pure action, one that is about transcending our ordinary existence and attaining these states of liberation and enlightenment. Any questions on the 3 or the 6 supreme qualities? Again, you may go through this and this might just sound like a bunch of words, and that's okay. You practice where you can. This is just to give you the whole picture of how you can make your actions of generosity even more powerful. The last advice that's given with all of these that we're going through is, how do we practice all 6 perfections within this? We already have talked about a bit of the perfection of wisdom, right? Because we talked about that as being the supreme method up above, to bring some awareness of emptiness in the midst of our giving, so that we don't cling too tightly to the self, to the other person, to the act itself of giving. Let's look at how we practice each of the 6 perfections within these, admitting that we haven't looked at the other perfections yet, but how do you practice giving within giving, generosity within generosity? When you give, also give the merit that arises from your giving. And we may want to hold on to that. I'm happy to give to you, but I want to hold on to the merit I get from that giving, because I want that to ripen for me. Well, even give that away. And then I guess there's merit from that giving. You can give that away. I mean, if you could be there all day with, infinite regress of your giving. Every time you give, you get more merit. You give that, you get more merit. You give that. Just have those thoughts at least a few times. That you're not wanting to hold on to any of this. If it starts to become about you, then it starts to become a fallacious way of, not so helpful way of practicing generosity, right? It starts to get us into that territory where we are being much more self-centered. Morality within generosity. When giving, you should be careful not to cause others any harm. Again, we don't have perfect knowledge of how others use what we give to them, but we want to do our best with what ability we have and what skillful means we can muster to be able to practice good morality with our giving. And giving doesn't mean taking from somebody else to give to them. I mean, the Robin Hood mentality isn't a good way to give, right? To say I'm going to steal from these people so that I can be generous with these people who really need those resources. Well, that's not a good act to engage in, because we are causing harm to others by virtue of that. Give what within the guidelines of good moral behavior. Patience with generosity. Be patient with any difficulties you encounter while giving to others, and be careful not to react angrily to a hurtful response from the recipient, like Shariputra did. Okay, monster throws the arm aside and says, how dare you give that to me? Well, that may happen to you, right? You may give $1 to somebody thinking you're being really generous. Maybe that's what you're working with, is $1 feels like a lot to give to somebody. And they may look at it and go, $1, what am I going to do with this? And they crumple it up and throw it at you. Well, if you get angry at them, we've just that whole act of generosity that you engaged in is gone, pretty much. You have to be patient with whatever other people do. Joyous effort with generosity. When giving, do so with joy and energy, overcoming any laziness that holds you back from giving. As we haven't gotten to joyous effort is a really important part of our practice. You notice the joyous part of it. And we should feel good about this. We should be enthused to give. They actually say, there's a verse from Chandrakirti, I don't know if I have it in front of me at the moment, but from Chandrakirti's text, where he goes into all 6 of these perfections, where he says that, the Bodhisattvas, when they hear just this thought, please give, just the words, please give, they immediately have joy in their hearts. Well, that takes a while to get there, right? A lot of us have still a bit of that stinginess, that miserliness, that when we hear those words from somebody, please give, we're like, backing up, So we want to have that joy. Try to not be lazy. We're calling that laziness. We'll get into this when we get to the perfection of joyous effort. Laziness in Buddhism isn't just the kind of indolence that causes us to want to veg out and not do something. It's also our own attachment to things, attachment to mundane concerns in our life that keep us from moving away from that. It's also our own kind of self-despondency, or putting ourselves down and thinking we can't possibly practice that way. There's a lot of different shades to laziness in Buddhism. The 5th one, concentration with generosity. While engaging in giving, keep your mind tranquil and undistracted. If we are engaged in acts of giving, this is where it's really tricky. In Santa Fe, you have a lot of folks who are asking for resources on the road while you're in your car, right? It's very hard sometimes, because you're in the middle of, okay, is the traffic light going to change, and what am I doing, and all. But as much as possible, be as undistracted. And this goes to some of what I think Alex was sharing. Give that person your attention. I mentioned this earlier. I mean, people that we do meet on the street that are in unfortunate situations, just making that eye contact with them is so important. It's validating them as a person, and showing that you're there with them on that same level, that you're not going to kind of, look down or look up or look elsewhere, kind of averting your glance. It's really important that be kind of our demeanor, is to be as undistracted and focused on that person as possible. The last one we've already talked about, wisdom with generosity. Use your faculty of analytical wisdom to discern the appropriateness of your gift. That's the kind of conventional wisdom that we have discussed here and there. And the circumstances of giving, like when you are giving, how that is being received, and so on. And be aware of the sphere of emptiness of the 3. The giver, the act of giving, and the receiver, as all lacking inherent existence. Wow, so we made it through that. Okay, congratulations. We still have one more little bit. So again, if you could bring the handout to next week, that would be great. If you want to take it home and read it over and spend a little time with it. It is yours to keep. If you could bring it next week, that would be useful, because we will conclude this by going through these hindrances to generosity. And maybe you could read through that if you do have time in advance, and then we'll be able to get through that. Because I do want to move on to the next perfection, the second perfection, perfection of ethics or morality, ethical discipline. We'll talk a bit more about that. So, but I will also, before we go on to that, I do recall that I did want to spend at least a little time on the secondary Bodhisattva vows that are directed at generosity. Because even if you haven't taken the vows, you might be encouraged to practice in this way, to get familiar with them. And if you have taken them, it might be a good reminder that you are supposed to be practicing this way. So I thought it would be useful as we go through these 6 perfections to actually spend a little time on that, because some of you in the room do have those vows and others are aspiring to practice them. So, wow. Anyone else want to say anything? I've been saying an awful lot today. I do thank you all for the comments and things you've shared. By the way, we did look up over the break the Hunger Project, and it does seem there was a split between Werner Erhard and Est in 1991. This project goes back quite a long time. So, but I don't know. I wasn't able to research whether there were other shady, scandalous things that happened around it. It is so an active organization in the world, and it has received some criticism. Pardon?
It is active in Santa Fe as well.
Oh, okay, good, in Santa Fe, yeah. Good, so it's good to know this sort of stuff. And again, it is good, I think, also for us as people who do give to charities and organizations in our world to check up on them and to make sure we are giving our resources to places where they are used well, where they do provide that benefit. It was you, I think, Michelle, who brought up caring for people at the border, dealing with immigration and what has all been happening there. Many organizations involved in that, many organizations involved in a lot of different things in our world, but it is worthwhile spending a little time checking up to make sure that we do give to reputable organizations so that our money does go where we want it to go, to have that kind of impact on others in the moment as well as in the future through our dedication and so on. All right, let's do our dedication prayers, page 246. This is as I said last week, a powerful act of giving where we think about what we've done here today, all the meritorious actions, all of our thoughts that were positive, all the words we heard, as well as the words we said, all the thoughts that we had, all of this being dedicated for the welfare of all beings. So before we recite this, do bring to mind those beings that you're holding in your heart right now. No doubt each of us has beings who we're quite close to, who are going through some difficulties, some obstacles, who have illness perhaps, who have died even recently, or maybe even dying at this time. Bring those beings to mind, as well as parts of the world where there's great strife. You can think about all what's happening around coronavirus, around climate change, around so many different things in our world. Wherever your heart is moved, bring those beings to mind and also hold them within the sphere of all beings that we want to benefit from what we've done here today through this prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Turn the page back to 244, 245. 245 is the prayer for His Holiness, and then we'll do the one on 244 for Rinpoche. as we recite these prayers, again, we can bring to mind all the other spiritual teachers that we have in our lives, as well as others, and spiritual teachers from all traditions. And all traditions have some benefit to others in terms of what they teach, how they help others to practice morality in this world, to be concerned about others, to have that mind of compassion and love, and so on. So we're making this prayer for all these spiritual guides to have good health and long lives, so that we and others can continue to have perfect guides in our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, thank you all very much. So for today, we just